Welcome to the channel, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into the heart of West Africa, to a country facing some seriously heavy stuff, Burkina Faso. Now you might be thinking, Burkina Faso, where even is that? And hey, I get it, geography wasn't exactly my strong suit either. But trust me, the situation in this nation is something we all need to be paying attention to. We're talking about a country grappling with a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Think conflict, hunger, climate change, you name it, Burkina Faso's dealing with it. And at the helm of it all is President Ibrahim Traoré, a military leader who came to power in a coup not just once but twice. Over the next few chapters, we're going to unpack 10 shocking facts about Burkina Faso that'll leave you wondering how things got so bad, and more importantly, what can be done to help. Get ready to have your minds blown, people, because this is a story you won't soon forget. So buckle up, grab your thinking caps, and let's dive right in. Alright folks, let's start with the harsh reality. Burkina Faso is in the throes of a humanitarian crisis that's spiraling out of control. We're talking about a staggering 6.3 million people, that's more than a quarter of the entire population, who are in desperate need of assistance. To put that into perspective, imagine the entire population of Denmark needing urgent help. It's a crisis of unimaginable proportions. Now you might be wondering, how did things get this bad? Well, picture this. Years of conflict fueled by armed groups and internal unrest have torn the country apart. Add to that the devastating effects of climate change, with droughts and heat waves decimating crops and leaving millions hungry. It's a perfect storm of disaster, and the people of Burkina Faso are caught right in the middle of it. Families are being torn apart, children are going to bed hungry, and the future looks bleak. This is a humanitarian emergency that demands our attention, people. We can't afford to turn a blind eye to the suffering of millions. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse, well, hold on to your hats, because it does. This crisis isn't just about hunger and displacement, it's about a nation teetering on the brink of collapse. The violence in Burkina Faso has become so rampant that the government has lost control of vast swaths of its own territory. We're talking about almost half the country, 40% to be exact. That's effectively become a no-go zone for the government. Imagine if the US government suddenly lost control of like everything west of the Mississippi River. That's the kind of chaos we're talking about here. This loss of control has had a devastating ripple effect. It's allowed armed groups to flourish, terrorizing communities and pushing the country further into the abyss. It's also made it nearly impossible for aid organizations to reach those who desperately need help. Now we can't talk about the crisis in Burkina Faso without addressing the elephant in the room, the violence. And trust me folks, the numbers are beyond alarming. Since 2019, more than 10,000 civilians have lost their lives in security incidents. That's like the entire population of a small town wiped out in just a few years. And if you think things are getting better, think again. In 2024 alone, over 2,550 people have been killed. That's an average of 7 people every single day. It's a level of violence that's almost impossible to comprehend. But behind these statistics are real people, mothers, fathers, children, whose lives have been cut short by senseless violence. Families are being torn apart, communities are being shattered, and the psychological scars of this conflict will run deep for generations to come. This is the human cost of conflict, and it's a price that's simply too high to pay. Now you might be thinking, who's behind all this violence? And the answer, unfortunately, is complicated. On one hand, you have various armed groups, some with links to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are vying for control and terrorizing communities. But it's not just these groups that are responsible for the bloodshed. Government forces have also been accused of human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings and attacks on civilians. It's a situation where ordinary people are caught in the crossfire, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. Imagine living in a constant state of fear, never knowing if you or your loved ones will be the next target. That's the reality for millions of people in Burkina Faso. They're trapped in a cycle of violence that seems to have no end in sight. And until this violence is addressed, and those responsible are held accountable, the people of Burkina Faso will continue to pay the price. Alright folks, let's talk about Burkina Faso, but hold on to your hats, because this ain't no cheerful tourism ad. Imagine a country where the government is losing control of almost half its territory. 40% of Burkina Faso is slipping out of government control. This includes crucial border areas, making it hard to stop smuggling and armed groups. Basic services like healthcare and education become almost impossible to provide. For millions, it's a life of fear and uncertainty. As the government weakens, armed groups get stronger, creating a vicious cycle. Now let's talk about the man in charge, shall we? President Ibrahim Traoré. Ibrahim didn't win any popularity contest. He got there the old-fashioned way, a coup. Not one but 2 coups in 8 months. Can Traoré unite a divided nation, defeat insurgency, and bring peace to Burkina Faso? Only time will tell. Burkina Faso is facing a hunger crisis of epic proportions. Millions don't know where their next meal is coming from. Parents skip meals so their children can eat. Malnutrition rates are skyrocketing. Conflict, climate change, and poverty have created this crisis. Climate change isn't just melting ice caps, it's hitting Burkina Faso hard. Droughts and heat waves are devastating crops, leaving families hungry. Farmers depend on rain, but when it doesn't come, disaster strikes. Harvests plummet, and hunger rises. It's a crisis they did little to create, yet they're on the front lines. Climate change is a justice issue. Alright folks, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the armed groups in the country. Burkina Faso is grappling with not one, but multiple groups, each with their own agendas, but all united by their willingness to use violence. On one side you've got jihadist groups, some linked to Al-Qaeda, others to ISIS. These groups are fighting to impose their strict interpretation of Islam, and they're not afraid to use terror to get their way. We're talking about attacks on villages, kidnappings, executions, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing. It's not just the jihadists. The Burkinabe government, in their fight against these groups, has also been accused of human rights abuses. We're talking about extrajudicial killings, torture, disappearances, the kind of stuff that makes your blood run cold. It's a classic case of caught in the crossfire where civilians are bearing the brunt of the violence no matter which way they turn. It's a lose-lose situation, and it's a tragedy unfolding on a massive scale. Now imagine this. You're living your life, you're a farmer, a shopkeeper, a teacher, and suddenly, your village is attacked. You have to flee for your life, leaving everything behind, your home, your belongings, your sense of security. That's the reality for millions of people in Burkina Faso right now. We're talking about over 2 million people displaced within their own country, forced to seek refuge in camps or with relatives, often living in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. Can you imagine the trauma, the fear, the uncertainty of not knowing when or even if you'll ever be able to return home? It's a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, and it's only getting worse. And let's not forget, these displaced people, they're not just numbers, they're human beings, mothers, fathers, children, all trying to survive in the face of unimaginable hardship. And sadly, their stories are often overlooked, lost in the headlines about terrorism and conflict. So, you've got a government struggling to contain multiple armed groups, and what do? They call in the reinforcements, but these aren't your typical soldiers, folks, these are volunteers. Or as they're known in Burkina Faso, the Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, the VDP. Now, on paper the idea sounds noble, right? Ordinary citizens taking up arms to defend their country against terrorism. But in reality it's a whole lot more complicated than that. See, these VDP fighters, they often lack proper training, they're poorly equipped, and they're operating in a highly volatile environment. And as we've seen time and time again, when you give people guns and a license to kill, things can go sideways real quick. And that's exactly what's happening in Burkina Faso. The VDP, instead of being a force for good, have been implicated in some pretty horrific atrocities. We're talking about extrajudicial killings, torture, attacks on villages, all in the name of fighting terrorism. It's a classic case of the cure being worse than the disease, and it's having a devastating impact on the country. But here's the kicker, folks, it gets even messier. You see, the VDP, they're not just some neutral force. They're often drawn from specific ethnic groups, which means their fight against terrorism is getting tangled up with pre-existing ethnic tensions. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. One minute you're fighting terrorists, the next minute you're targeting entire communities based on their ethnicity. And that's a recipe for disaster, folks. It's how you turn a conflict into a full-blown ethnic war. And that's the real tragedy here. The very people who are supposed to be protecting civilians are turning against them, fueling the cycle of violence and deepening the divisions within Burkina Faso. It's a stark reminder that there are no easy solutions in this conflict, and that even with the best of intentions, things can quickly spiral out of control. So, Burkina Faso is stuck between a rock and a very hard place. You've got these jihadist groups wreaking havoc, and the government is struggling to keep up. Enter the Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, or VDP for short. They're like this civilian militia, folks stepping up to defend their communities because, hey, someone's gotta do it, right? Now, on paper the VDP sounds like a good idea. People coming together to protect their homes. It's like a neighborhood watch, but with, way higher stakes. The government arms them, trains them to a certain extent, and sends them out to fight. But here's the thing about militias. They're often a recipe for disaster. You're essentially giving weapons to people with limited training, often driven by fear and anger, and hoping they make the right decisions in the heat of the moment. And as we've seen time and time again, that doesn't always happen. And in Burkina Faso, it's led to a whole other set of problems. See, the VDP has been accused of some pretty horrific things. We're talking extrajudicial killings, attacks on civilians, and exacerbating ethnic tensions. Remember when I said Burkina Faso is like a pressure cooker? Well, the VDP is like turning up the heat. They're often drawn from specific communities, and sometimes their idea of defense involves targeting other groups they see as sympathetic to the jihadists. It's a classic case of an eye for an eye that ends up making the whole world blind. The problem is, when you have a group operating with limited oversight and accountability, things can get really messy, really quickly. And that's exactly what's happening in Burkina Faso. The VDP, instead of being the solution, is becoming part of the problem, fueling the cycle of violence and deepening the divides within the country. It's a grim situation, and one that raises serious questions about the use of militias in these kinds of conflicts. So, you've got Ibrahim Traoré, this young military leader who came to power promising to fix this mess. He's got this whole new Burkina Faso vision, and people are cautiously optimistic. But let's be real, folks, Traoré is walking a tightrope here, and there's a whole lot that could go wrong. On one hand, he's got to deal with the jihadists, who are still running rampant in large parts of the country. These guys aren't messing around, and they're not going to just pack up and leave because there's a new sheriff in town. Then there's the humanitarian crisis. Millions of people are displaced, hungry, and in desperate need of aid. It's a logistical nightmare, made even worse by the security situation. Imagine trying to deliver food and medicine when there are landmines everywhere and armed groups controlling the roads. And if that wasn't enough, Traoré's also got to deal with the international community. After 2 coups in quick succession, Burkina Faso is on thin ice with many of its allies. They're facing sanctions, aid is drying up, and there's a lot of pressure to return to democratic rule. It's like trying to rebuild your house while your neighbors are giving you the side eye and threatening to call the homeowners association. Traoré's got his work cut out for him, and it's going to take a whole lot of skill, diplomacy, and maybe a little bit of luck to pull Burkina Faso back from the brink. The big question is, can he do it? Can he unite a fractured nation, defeat a determined enemy, and convince the world that he's the leader Burkina Faso needs? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the stakes couldn't be higher. So, there you have it. Burkina Faso, a nation grappling with a complex web of crises, from jihadist insurgencies to humanitarian disasters and everything in between. It's a story of resilience, of people caught in the crossfire, of a country fighting for its very survival. The situation is dire, no doubt, but amidst the darkness there are glimmers of hope. The resilience of the Burkinabe people is remarkable, their spirit unbroken despite the hardships they face. Civil society organizations are working tirelessly to provide aid and support to those in need. And there's a growing recognition that a lasting solution requires addressing the root causes of the conflict, from poverty and inequality to climate change and political instability. The road ahead is long and uncertain, but one thing is clear: the world cannot afford to turn its back on Burkina Faso. The international community must step up and provide meaningful support, not just military aid, but also humanitarian assistance, development programs, and diplomatic efforts to bring peace and stability to this troubled nation. The fate of Burkina Faso hangs in the balance, and its people deserve our attention, our solidarity, and our unwavering support. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Let us know in the comments what you think about the situation in Burkina Faso, and what other topics you'd like us to cover.